Okay. Hello, everyone. Wow, that's just amazing. So many people here. It's incredible. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Johanna Pirker. I'm a computer scientist and game developer from Austria. That's because of my strong accent, you might know. And I was very nervous about this talk, but someone told me I just need to inspire people with my talk in the Indie Soapbox and do a lot of ranting, and then I'm going to be fine. So I tried to do both. And I would like to start with my backstory. So I think every one of us knows this moment when you're out of motivation, you're not inspired anymore. And I had this phase also a couple of years ago, and I was stuck. And I didn't have any inspiration, and I was stuck not only in developing games, but also in playing games. So I played games all the time from the same genre, from the same developer. I played those games from the same platform. And I thought, okay, I'm stuck also in playing games. How can I develop any new games? And I really tried to find new game mechanics, but playing always the same games doesn't make any sense for that. So I thought I should try out something totally new, get out of my comfort zone, try games which I would never play in other circumstances. And I thought getting out of this comfort zone would eventually help me learning and getting my inspiration back again. So I wanted to combine it with something which I really like, and I love to travel. I'm one of those crazy backpacking persons trying to see all the countries, and I would always buy a travel guide. And if you look at a travel guide, you would get a list of things you should do in this country, monuments you should visit, food you should try, movies you should watch, everything to get the whole experience for this country. But you never get an experience for games you should play. But I believe that our games are cultural goods as well. And people should think of this and should add those to the travel guides. I believe our games are fantastic for that. They should be relevant. And that's why I tried to start a project which I call A Year of Playing the World. And I tried to find and play games from all the different countries of the world, which are roughly 200. So I tried to find and approach developers and community people from the countries and would ask them always the same question. If there's one game I should play developed in your country, which one should it be? Ask this yourself as well. It's quite an interesting question, pretty challenging. And I got a list full of inspirational games. And I was inspired by environments, by strong characters, by really cool stories, and by fancy mechanics. But most interesting, it wasn't the games with the fancy mechanics which inspired me most. It was games which were relevant to the culture or to the countries or to the regions. And I want to give you some ideas for inspirations, how to also create really interesting games that way. So maybe create a game with cultural relevance, like they did in the game A Year Walk, a Swedish game, where they use Swedish traditions which they're taught through this game. Or tell personal stories relevant to your region, like Abdullah did in the game Path Out. He actually tells the story how he escaped the Syrian war in 2014. And he makes it even more personal. It's a very dramatic story by adding YouTube-style comments to that. Or something more fun, find and spread local fun stories, local gems, local stories which are only known in this region. So for example, this guy, the game is called Knödelkrieg in German, Dumpling War in English. And there was a Bavarian man who was really upset about the noise the aircrafts were making very close to his house. This was 1967. And he decided to fight back by throwing dumplings at them. But looking at those games, I also found a lot of issues and problems. And one really big issue, I think we are developing games in the wrong way, because we are not treating our games in a cultural good way. We don't think of them as something which should be also preserved in 10 years or 100 years. Some of the games I was trying to play were not even playable after 1 year anymore. And now think of all the controllers we're having right now, the engines we are using. What will the controllers of the future look like? Can we play our games in 10 years still? And if it's cultural good, we need to think of ways how to solve this problem. So develop your games with more care for the future. And please find inspiration by my list of the games from the different countries on my website. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. Hang on one sec. You're just too fast, Davey.
That's what...
Don't do it.
Hi, I'm on video camera right now.
All right,
Hi.
Please welcome Davey.
There it is. Hi there, my name is Davey Wreden. I was the creator of The Stanley Parable, The Beginner's Guide, and Absolutely, a True Crime Story featuring Keanu Reeves. Today, I want to talk just a little bit about some of the game design questions that have been on my mind lately and some of the goals that I'm shooting for. One of the ways that I really like to work is by setting myself these very impossible sounding goals and then figuring out how I can actually pull it off. So I don't necessarily have answers to these questions just yet, but I thought I'd put them to you and see what you think. So I've been thinking a lot about why people continue playing a game after they've started. This is if we are assuming that the game is at least somewhat fun or interesting on a core mechanical level, and if so, why does a person want to put in hour after hour on this one game as opposed to playing a different game or doing something else with their life entirely? Basically, what creates their engagement? And for the purpose of this talk, I'm really only talking about single-player games. Socializing and competition in multiplayer games are sort of like their whole own separate motivators. So after a lot of thought, here's my personal interpretation, just mine, of why people continue playing a game, distilled into three extremely broad categories. One is to become better or to optimize. It's the enjoyable feeling that you are better now at the game than you were when you started playing. Number two is to make progress, watching your number go up or gaining more items or more stuff. And number three is to see more content because we like the story, we like the characters, we like the world, and we want to continue to see more of it. So to me, these three things sum up what like 99.9% of games out there today are doing to create engagement with their players. And this is really cool, and we know that this is effective on some level, and it can be a lot of fun, and we all like games like this. So the question that I've been grappling with a lot lately is, how could you make a game that is engaging and compelling and that does not, at its core, rely on any of these three things to make you interested? And by the way, that's like, I'm not saying like none of them, but like what could you do to not have them be the core and then bring in other things and then bring these things in later on once there is like another core? I think one of the things with these three things is, with these 3 points, is that they all rely on something outside the act of play itself to be interesting. With the first, you're imagining a future version of yourself who is better at the game. With the second, you're imagining a future where your number is bigger. With the third, you're imagining how cool it'll be to see the rest of the story. So in a way, they're all future motivated. And I would love to explore play that is engaging and compelling in this very moment without that reliance on the future in order to provide the value. I think that if I say this right off the bat, a lot of people would say, that sounds like a toy. And yes, this is typically how we think of toys, is as a device that has no function except the intrinsic act of play. But usually we draw a kind of ideological line between a toy and a video game. And we think of a game as having like a point or a context that elevates it above the act of just play itself. So the weird goal that I'm setting for myself is to create a game that is intrinsically fun to play and that has the kind of context that would make us say this is a video game, but that does not at its core rely on any of these three things to be compelling. And like I said, I think that they can still be there, but like, could they be something other than the like sole and direct reason why you would want to continue playing at all? So for example, what would a game be like that offered you interesting choices, but you can't actually get better at making those choices, or you can't make more optimized choices? What about a game where you're growing or making progress in an interesting way, but where the future outcomes are obscured enough that as a player you can't ever concretely see what specifically this progress will lead to? What about a game that has a story, but you don't need to see every piece of content to get the story? Say there are 10 hours of story content, but if you only play 1 hour, you've gotten just as valid of an experience as someone who plays the full 10. All of these sound a little bit counterintuitive in the modern design culture, but that's why I'm really excited. The bizarre and impossible sounding goal that I've set for myself is to try to create a game that does all of these things. I don't have a good answer yet as to how exactly to do that, but here are a few games that I look to as inspiration. Desert golfing is fun to play, you can get better, there's a score, there's new content, but the game never explicitly rewards you for any of it. The score doesn't mean anything, many people never see the new content, and if you play it for hours, it's because you're genuinely enjoying being in this world and whacking a golf ball around. Everything is a vast simulation that has an actual point of view about the world and lots of content to explore, but you can stop playing at pretty much any time and you've had just as valid of an experience as someone who's seen every piece of content in the game. Neko Atsume is sort of like this. If you haven't seen this, it's the mobile game where you leave out treats for cats and at random times, cats will show up. It's fun to see new cats, but there is kind of an incentive to make more money and collect the cats, so it's not a perfect example, but this is really a descendant of Tamagotchi, which had no particular win state except to feel connected with a tiny thing in your pocket and to treat it, with however you're feeling at the time. It's engaging, it's compelling, and it doesn't rely on future outcomes to be fun. All right, that's all I got. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Davey. All right, next slides. Please welcome Claris.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claris Cyarron, co-founder and creative director at Silverstring Media, and I want to get devs to see their games as spaces for change, healing, and contemplation. To that end, I would like to discuss with you today an underutilized but extremely on-trend narrative approach. And that is to embrace the occult, to open yourselves and your game to the dangerous, irrational world of magical thinking. Just a little bit. Specifically, though, I'm talking about divination. Divination is an ancient and widely diverse form of magic involving the use of an object or objects to gain answers to questions, often for the purpose of preparing for the future. Now, if that sounds to you just a little bit like a simulation or a game, you're already getting the idea. Now, let's take a step back for a second, because I think one of the reasons why more and more people are flocking to magic as an aesthetic, as an identity, and as a sincere part of their lives is that magic is a customizable but ultimately shared cultural metaphor that focuses on the experiential aspects of a situation rather than the technicalities. So let's talk about tarot for a second as an example of divination. Now, depending on your perspective, tarot might seem like a mystical tool or a bunch of delusional nonsense, but I think of tarot as a game, one whose purpose has shifted over time from gambling and entertainment towards contemplation and transformation. Now, video games have been exploring divinatory cards since the 80s, and some games have just copied it straight up. Others have used it as a theme or a narrative framework. Shout out to a game that I had the privilege of working on called Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. But how do you design for divination? Well, first you have to understand that we're designing for distinct, separate moments, separate from the mundane world, but also from the regular flow of your game. So guidelines 1 and 2 here help create that sense of separation. Your divinatory tool or focus object should be special and stand out from the rest of the interactable things in your game. As far as creating a special space, I have some good news. You've already got this somewhat covered. You want to invite and invoke a state of playfulness, creativity, and receptiveness, and games are already excellent at this. Number 3, You want to put complex and interlocking systems and ordering structures clearly on display. But here's the kicker. These systems don't actually need to work or have any meaning. The mere suggestion of deep underlying logic is often enough to send our brains into an interpretive, pattern-recognizing overdrive. Number 4 and 5 are fairly self-explanatory. You're trying to create visual hooks for a player to find inspiration and hang their own personal narrative upon. Number 6, introduce randomness, because this takes advantage of apophenia, which is the human tendency to seek out and find patterns and significance in random information. Number 7, ask open-ended questions. Stick to broad common subjects, at least at the start. That'll help your players warm up. You can also make it clear to your players that there's no wrong answer and that it's up to them to decide how they perceive the moment. If you're curious about how to deal with an obstinate or nihilistic player, maybe check out a game I worked on called Glitch Hikers and see how it responds to you being a stick in the mud. You might also want to detach your divinatory moment from your game's other mechanics. I'm a min-maxer, personally, so I have trouble getting into a free association mindset if I'm worried about messing up my stats. And the final 2, mix and match any of these rules. Experiment, borrow others, or distill your own. Generally, the more you use, the more hooks you have, and the wider success rate you'll have amongst your audience. But use what works for you. So, what are some benefits to bringing a divinatory moment or 2 into your game? Well, for starters, it's affirming. A game, its creators and its players are not adversaries, though it sometimes can feel that way. Divinatory moments underscore the trust you're putting in your player and acknowledges that we are all co-creators in the final experience. That trust is empowering, and it's potentially quite transformative. I would wager that we've all had deeply meaningful experiences with a video game before. It's probably why most of us are here right now. And I found that by opening a game up to, or rather offering your player an opportunity to make a game be about what they need it to be about in that moment is a great way to increase the chance of your game having that meaningful, transformative effect on others, which feels sweet when it happens. Best of all, this is pretty scope efficient because any meanings or player interpretations can be mediated by abstract symbols. You and your game don't have to anticipate fully or understand that a player is dealing with the loss of their great Uncle Billy, for example, in order to build upon it or acknowledge it. Now, I didn't mean to stumble into magic and the occult when I joined games. I definitely didn't. But over the years, I've had a great deal of fun and success experimenting with these techniques. And I hope you will use these arcane secrets wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Claris. All right. Next up, please welcome Danny.
Hiya. Hi, I'm Danny Baranowsky. I'm a composer and game designer. I wrote the music for Binding of Isaac, Super Meat Boy, Cannonball, Crypt of the Necrodancer. Now I'm doing music and game design with Brace Yourself Games. I was going to give an adorable talk about how game design is like the Britney Spears song Toxic, but it's going to have to wait because I had a experience recently that hit me pretty hard, cellulitis. A few weeks ago, I was hospitalized for 9 days with severe cellulitis. You don't need to know the detail. It was but it was the most painful week of my whole life. Felt pain sharper than what I've ever known possible. It wasn't great, but the experience gave me some clarity on something that I felt compelled to talk about instead of Britney Spears. Maybe someday I'll give that talk, though. It was going to be awesome. Lip syncing, dance moves, little boom mic. Anyway, let me back up a little bit, though. Last 7 or 8 years, I've suffered from chronic pain. A few years back, I was diagnosed with lupus. It's an immune system disease. Recently, I was undiagnosed lupus and diagnosed connective tissue disorder. If you've ever dealt with immune disease, you know these things are very hard to nail down. I I definitely have fibromyalgia, which essentially means my body is super good at feeling pain. Long story short, I'm in some kind of pain every day, all day. Here's some fun facts about debilitating pain. Maybe that's a little melodramatic, but I totally feel what this guy's saying. And based on NIH statistics, I'm not alone. Pain affects more Americans than diabetes, heart disease, and cancer combined. 1 in 4 Americans have chronic pain. This is the Wong-Baker pain scale. It's a way to communicate and track pain. On the left is someone with no pain at all. On the right is the worst pain you've ever felt. Honestly, none of these people look like they're any kind of mood I would ever want to be in. Who wants to be in number 0? But you might not be familiar with this because 75% of you have probably never experienced chronic pain. That blows my mind. I can't speak for others, but the best day I can hope for is about a 2, which is a lot better than it used to be, but it's still there. Pain is constantly vying for my attention. It's constantly barking at me. Sometimes you can tune it out. Sometimes it's just piling on other stresses you got going on. It's like a lot like when you get a skill in a game that reserves a portion of your mana bar. Yeah, we play games, I know. You have a lower reserve of energy to just spend on tasks. There's another permutation of this you may have heard of called spoon theory. You can Google that to get more information. Essentially, it's a way to impart to otherwise healthy people what daily life is like for people with diseases that don't go away. So what does this have to do with video games? Trying to play video games in the hospital made very clear that some UI and gameplay concepts very clearly stand out as being bad for people with pain problems. It also struck me that some design decisions that are good for people with pain problems kind of correspond with just good game feel, good UI design. So here's some thoughts on making it more accessible. Hard to close windows, tiny add windows on iOS are the worst. I didn't think that was going to be the applause line, but all right. When everything hurts, fine motor control is more difficult. This isn't to say you should remove or smooth over anything that needs fine motor control, but you can certainly limit tiny X's on mobile touchy screens and stuff. If you think about it, though, you kind of already know about painful UI design. These video ads are designed to be painful because it makes them harder to ignore. There's a good reason the X is as far away from your thumb as possible. So just think about that power you have to cause people pain, even if it's just a little bit. Slow opening menus, unskippable cutscenes, dialogue. When a chunk of your attention bar is depleted already, you have a smaller reserve of attention to work with. That spinny, crazy animation on the menu looks so cool, but trust me when I say that long menu animations and unskippable cutscenes go from annoying to deal-breaking. When I'm flaring up, my skin is red, all my joints are hot and achy. I'm just trying to escape from my body from a minute, man. Don't make me watch these intros and cutscenes and menu animations over and over again. I have limited time until my body gives out, and I want to play your game. I accidentally closed the app 1 second. Usability problems, I don't know. Requiring buttons to be held down to do things. I don't mean to bash on Destiny specifically, but it's the most prominent example I could think of. I understand many game mechanics require you to hold a button down. I'm willing to play through that when it's required by gameplay. But when every inch of your skin hurts and your finger joints are cranking, it's just another UI hurdle that reminds me that my body don't work so good. Inconsistent escape toggle buttons. When you have to press I to get to the inventory, escape to get out, but escape doesn't always get you out. When the key presses are all over the place and not consistent, these repetitive motions get gnarly real quick. I would like to conclude by telling you a little bit about my grandma, Darlene. This was last year at my wedding. We put her into VR. Bottom of the ocean in space. Took her to her hometown in Illinois she hadn't seen in 60 years in Google Earth VR. It was quite a challenge to help her interact with things. It would have been much easier for us if there were external controls I could help with, one-handed operation modes. Grandma, she passed away last month, and she had even expressed interest in playing Stardew Valley if she wasn't in so much pain. And I tried to think about how easy that would have been for her with her painful hands and controller interactions. What could have been done to give her a chance to play? I think there's so many people out there who want to play our games, but they can't because of a UI quirk or a hasty UI decision. If we could just try and be cognizant of that when we design, maybe it might open our game up to a wider audience and make it easier for our existing audience to enjoy them. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. All right. Yeah. Please welcome Adriel.
Hi. There it is. Hi. I'm Adriel Wallick. I'm an independent game developer. I'm most well known for having once made one new game every week for an entire year, as well as being the creator and organizer of Train Jam, an annual game jam that is on a train. It goes from Chicago to San Francisco every year. I oftentimes describe my life as a series of tweets that I took too seriously, which sounds silly and overly simplistic, but it has this weird little element of truth to it. To explain what I mean, I'm going to show my two favorite examples. This is a tweet I made in 2015. I was watching Games Done Quick, which is a super great charity stream. It's a week-long thing where a bunch of speedrunners get together and they speedrun games, they raise money. It's super amazing. If you've never watched it, I would highly recommend it. I was watching it, it was great, and I was like, man, I really want to do this, but slow. That'd be super fun. It was just a totally flippant tweet. Then my good friend Teddy Deef took me slightly seriously, and then we picked a weekend. And long story short, we made a website and a Twitch channel, and now we've raised over $43,000 for charity over 3 years. Yay. It's called Square Bowl. It happens over Super Bowl weekend every year. That's that. And then this one is my personal favorite. So I took a train ride once from Boston to Chicago, Chicago to Seattle, and then Seattle to Vancouver, which is a really long train ride. It was really fun. And about halfway through the first day, I tweeted with a lot of typos, 12 hours in, and being on a train is awesome. Thinking of organizing an indie train next year. Just keep picking up indies across the US. 2 months later, don't get derailed, go to GDC, all aboard the train jam, and that was the first train jam. Which then 4 months later was this. It was 60 people I'd crammed on a train. We made some games. The next year was 120 people I'd put on a train. The next year it was raining, so we had to take this photo inside, but this is 200 people who went on a train. This was the first year that we needed to have a drone to take the group photo. This is this is 300 people. It's also the first year I'd rented out an entire train. And then most recently, this was this year, 340 people, which now brings our grand total of participants to over 1,000 people and over 12,000 miles or 19,000 kilometers traveled across those 5 years. And that's something that I've learned to embrace over the years, follow these random things that just sort of spark my interest. Because, as you can tell, I've never really known what I wanted to do with my life. I once knew somebody who knew what they wanted to do with their life. He had this plan, and he picked a job career when he was like 6 years old. Every decision he made in his life was towards that life goal. And 26 years later, he's now doing that thing he wanted to be when he was 6. And what I wanted to be when I was 6 was a mailbox. So, not a mail carrier, not a post office worker. I wanted to be a mailbox. I was a nosy child. I wanted to read letters. I figured that would be legal. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time making plans and breaking them. If you'd asked me 5 years ago what I'd be doing right now, I'd probably say something like, I'm living in a suburb with a kid or something and maybe a small business on the side. I don't know. I definitely probably wouldn't have said on stage at GDC giving a talk, after I've just ridden across the country on a train that I rented for the 5th year in a row, bringing, hundreds of people together on a train, making a game to GDC. Oh, also in those 5 years, I got married and moved to another country, and I run a charity stream, and I've been invited to speak at places, and I know the people that I've looked up to for years in my industry. And that's not a big old brag. That's all these things, pretty much 80% of them probably weren't even on my realm of things that I thought I could even possibly be achieving. Because there was this long period of my life where, this was my life plan. I had a goal and I go towards that goal and, whatever. I didn't really think about it. I was just this is what I have to do. This is what a normal human does, so I'm gonna do that normal human thing. And I knew deep down that I wasn't really happy and I was super unsatisfied, but I figured that's just how being an adult was gonna work for me, whatever. I'll be unhappy forever, that's fine. There's other people out there who are happy with what they do, so I should just figure out how to deal with it. And it wasn't really until I started exposing myself to, other people and experiences and places and conferences and cultures and everything that I started sort of examining my life plan and being like, oh, I discovered which parts of my life I could throw away, which parts I liked, which parts I wanted to keep, which parts, weren't working and everything. And I started viewing all of my plans more fluid and, sort of allowing myself to get swept away by the things that I wanted to do, but weren't part of the plan and all that kind of good stuff. And, that's when I finally started feeling happy and I was, excited with the people I was associating with and the stuff that I was doing and the way my life was moving, and that's not times to say, it's not like I'm not ever unsatisfied, but that's a normal human kind of unsatisfied that we all sort of feel because we're all weird and complicated. But the point I want to make is that it wasn't me throwing my life plans out the window and turning into a person that's all like fluid and undefined. And that's not the part that made me happy. The part that made me happy was the fact that I learned to examine the trajectory of my life and adjust to new interests and experiences that made me happier. If you have a plan, you end up exactly where you're going, cool, that's great. If you have a plan and you discard it and you make a new plan and then you sort of like turn that around and do all sorts of other things, that's also great too. The point is to check in with yourself and take life in small chunks of time and try your hardest to see that you're still heading towards the direction that you want to be, heading, and make adjustments if you can and you want to. That's sort of all I really wanted to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Adriel. Okay. Please welcome Justin.
So hi, my name is Justin Ma. I'm co-founder of Subset Games. This is Final Fantasy Tactics. It is one of my all-time favorite games. In it, your units can learn a ton of abilities from a variety of classes and eventually make your ideal fighting squad. Here is one type of skill within the game, the support abilities. However, when I play the game, this is all that I see. Today I'm going to be talking about a mental flaw that I have, which I will be calling min-maxing. So this skill is called JP Boost. It increases the class experience points gained by 50%. Whenever I play, I feel I have no choice but to use this skill on every single character. No matter how useful the other skills are, or how much I don't want to use this skill, I'm helpless against my need to reduce grinding and optimize my time. For me, the inclusion of this skill removed potential interesting playstyles, made me feel guilty when I wanted to experiment, and in a general sense, slightly decreased my enjoyment of the game. What I'm calling min-maxing is pretty similar to other gaming neuroses, for example, needing to search every single hallway of a JRPG despite having 1,000 elixirs, feeling compelled to collect everything even if it means hours of not having fun, and of course, speedrunning. It's just kidding. Moving on, I believe that the term min-maxing originally came from D&D and RPGs when you would use math to perfectly optimize a character for a very specific purpose. However, I'm using the term to describe something slightly different. In short, the compulsion to do the most optimal play, even to the detriment of my own enjoyment of the game. The feeling that forces me to Google best leveling priest build in Ragnarok Online, the feeling that I simply have to grind each unit to level 20 before I advance classes in Fire Emblem, needing to get +5s in every single level in Oblivion. My problem isn't that you can game the system by being as efficient as possible. My problem is when it's specifically not fun to do so. That being said, this compulsion is not always problematic. In MMOs, it's critical to optimize your combat efficiency for raids. Some games' primary fun is finding OP combos of skills. And of course, the severity of this feeling varies greatly between people. Some people can ignore JP Boost. I wouldn't grind crew levels in FTL, though some people feel the need to do so if they have the opportunity. So when does min-maxing become a problem? First, when the interesting mechanics are much less time efficient. As I get older and have less time to devote to games, if I'm forced to make a choice between an interesting mechanic and something that lets me achieve my goals quicker, I almost always will take the quicker one out of pure practicality. In reality, the amount of time saved could be pretty minimal, but this psychological burden is very hard for me to ignore. My next problem is when single-player games have a very strong positive feedback loop. The obvious example is an option to increase experience or resources gained. By investing in this early and leveling in an optimal way, You can sort of outpace the difficulty scaling in the game. Besides feeling like I'm forced to pick these options, they often end up decreasing the difficulty in the later stages of the game. The period when you already understand the mechanics and would benefit from greater challenge often ends up being the easiest part. Solving the game can feel fun, but in practice it often means that I lose interest during the climax. No, it can still be fun. I enjoy Plants vs. Zombies, but literally every single level I will do the same strategy. Speaking of which, the third problem I've found is having an optimal strategy. In Advanced Wars, I could come up with a brilliant tactic to counter the enemy's composition, or I could just build mech infantry and gradually take over the whole map. When a single strategy seems effective in every situation and there's a heavy penalty for failure, such as losing an hour's progress, I feel like I'm disincentivized from trying anything new. To summarize, for people like me, finding a way to optimize the game can be an enjoyable challenge, but can also feel like a curse that results in me having less choice as a player, taking fewer risks, and theoretically having less fun. It's not critical to avoid these min-maxing traps in all games, but if you want to help protect me from myself, here are a few things to stay away from. Try to avoid increases, resources, gains mechanics unless they're completely necessary. Try to prevent there being an optimal playstyle. If a single strategy works every time, there's no incentive for growth. Don't force the player to choose between fun and time efficiency. It's just not even a choice for me. Our games are certainly not perfect in this regard, but I've found that this lens of will the player feel like they have no choice but to do this is a helpful tool when trying to find the fun gameplay loops in our games. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin. Please welcome Dee.
Hi, a few things off the top. I'm going to make this talk as optimistic as possible. I've tried to include as many existing and recent examples from the indie game scene as possible to show what it looks like when things are working, in my opinion, but at times it dips into industry examples. Okay, this talk is going to be about me. Ha! So it's important for me to start with who I am, especially for those of you in the back. This is my face. I'm Dee. I'm a femme person. My pronouns are they, them, she, her. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, in the States. I now live in Seattle, Washington. Rock on. I used to be a fedora kid. My senior quote in the yearbook in high school was a quote from a goofy robot anime. I really like the color purple and mustaches, and I've been working in video game communities for the past few years. I got kind of a goofy smile in this one. Okay, cool. You all know me and who I am. So this is me, and this is what I want you to think of me. Target me. Make me your target audience. If you are a creator of games, systems, design, communities, writing, journalism, as an indie who is not beholden to stakeholders, target me. Hire a diversity consultant and make me your target audience. This is a cool, oh, oops. Okay, there we go, cool. I have dark skin. In character generators, make my brown skin the normalized choice. When I open your character generator, make brown skin one of the first things I see. I don't want to scroll through to find brown skin. Target me. I'm a second-generation immigrant. I'm Filipino-American. I will never be accepted as Filipino or as American fully. I'm third culture. Target me. I grew up in a so-called system of meritocracy and have dealt with a lack of self-worth and unhealthy relationship with my value as a person my entire life. If you make digital interactives, target me. I have a non-traditional relationship with my body, especially with regards to my appearance and presentation. Target me. If I want to enforce the pronouns they, them, I want a game and system that does so respectfully. Target me. I live in a political context that makes my lived experience much more arduous than is validated by the larger communities that surround and encompass me. Yet, I choose to be optimistic and hopeful as hell. Target me. Target me in such a way that my existence is not a punchline. It's great when the jokes I make are a punchline. I'm sometimes funny, But don't make my existence or attributes a punchline. Yes, I acknowledge the possibilities. When I use the phrase, target me, make me the target audience of your creation, an individual can take this and ask, can I make money off of me? Can I make money off of you? Can you use me as a mental or creative exercise for a few games? And that's a little weird if I think about it too hard, but yes, I acknowledge those possibilities. But my favorite possibility that you can take away from this talk is, can you make me excited with your next creation? Can you make me feel excited, like as excited as I was the first time I felt like I belonged when I moderated MMORPG forums? For this possibility, I invite you to target me. Lastly, target my students. I teach programming to folks in the gender diverse population who are career changers as adults into the tech industry. For the interested students, I teach them about game making. Every day that I teach them, I am reminded of how they were prevented or invalidated from going into tech or games programming growing up, and that they are hungry for it now. I'm reminded of all the folks who want to play games that target them and haven't found those games. So yes, make games for yourself, make games for your friends, make games for your needs, but when you can, consider hiring a diversity consultant and making a game that targets me. Thank you to all the games that have and continue to target me. Final notes before my time is up. Use they, them in your writing and speaking. Elevate your moderators. Don't exploit people's traumas. Hire diversity consultants. Personal health comes first. You deserve a good quality of life. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Dee. That was great. All right, moving along. We're on number 8 here. Please welcome Frank.
Hello. So yes, in the game that I released last year, I had a project called the Toth Sausage Conjecture. And about a month later, I received this email from Toth's grandson, who said, "How did you know about my grandfather's work? This is amazing. How did you know about the sausage conjecture? Are you a mathematician? Did you find out about it from another colleague at NYU who'd worked with my grandfather?" And I'm definitely not a mathematician, but I had a nice conversation with Laszlo Toth's grandson, and he was very excited and happy, and that made me happy. And so I thought I would spend my 5 minutes on the soapbox celebrating the work of this man, Laszlo Fejes Toth, and maybe giving just a brief explanation of the Toth sausage conjecture. First of all, there are a couple other famous Laszlo Toths. One of them was a Hungarian geologist who thought that he was Jesus Christ and vandalized the Pietà. The other one was a fictional character created by the comedian Don Novello, who wrote funny letters to celebrities and politicians. But this is the Laszlo Toth that we are here to talk about. Laszlo Fejes Toth, a Hungarian mathematician who was someone who worked in the sort of higher order geometry. He wrote books like Regular Figures, which were full of beautiful images of patterns and shapes and tiling systems. And the sausage conjecture is a problem in the domain of, the sphere packing problems. And sphere packing problems are problems in geometry that look at how you can efficiently pack lots of spheres together into a volume. So it sort of goes back to the 16th century when people would look at stacks of cannonballs and wonder, is that the most efficient way to arrange cannonballs? In the case of the sausage conjecture, Toth was looking at ways of wrapping spheres, and the most efficient way to wrap spheres using the least amount of material. So in this case, we have a bunch of 2D spheres, which are also called circles. And so you would look at these and say, what's the most efficient way to wrap these? So if I'm using string, let's say, what's the way to arrange these spheres so that I have to use the least amount of string in order to wrap them up. And it turns out that the right way to do it is to just line them up like this, right, like a sausage, one after the next in a straight line, and that's the most efficient way to wrap them until you get to 7. Then once you hit 7, this is actually a slightly more efficient way to arrange the circles. So what about spheres? Well, in the case of spheres, the same thing holds true, right? You'd line them up just like a sausage, end to end. There you go, all the way up until you hit 56. And then at 56, all of a sudden, this becomes the most efficient way to arrange them, right? And you might ask yourself, what about a 3-sphere, right? What about a hypersphere in 4 dimensions? And it turns out that, yes, just as you might expect, somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000, we're not sure where, but there's a spot where it becomes more efficient to not arrange them. But up through the first 50,000, for sure, you should just line them up, or I don't know how to gesture in 4D space, but you line them up like this. But then at some point, there's some other arrangement that is more efficient. And so you might think, now, this is going to continue, right? And in the higher dimensions, in 5 dimensions, in 6 dimensions, in 7 dimensions, you're always going to see something like this, where first you want to line them all up like this, and then at a certain point, there becomes a more efficient arrangement. But Toth disagreed. So Toth's theory was that starting at 5 dimensions, it's always most efficient to line them up in a sausage, and it never changes. So that is the sausage conjecture. For dimensions 5 and above, the sausage arrangement is always optimal, no matter how many spheres that you are wrapping. So as it turns out, we know for a fact that this is true for dimensions of 42 and above. That has been proven. Everything between 4 and 42, we don't know, but we think he's probably right. That's what a conjecture is, right? And so that is the Toth sausage conjecture. And just as an example of what is kind of interesting about this, it's relevant to cryptography and code. So for example, if you're designing a language, sphere packing problems are actually really relevant to that, because you want to pack as many words as you can into your language space, but you also want them to be as far apart as they can be, so that if you're sending a message over a noisy channel, the receiver has the best chance of interpreting each symbol correctly. And so that is the Toth sausage conjecture. Thank you.
I bet you didn't think you were going to learn about multidimensional sausages today. Thank you, Frank. Please welcome our next speaker, Rosa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rosa. I'm a member of the cooperative Digital Liberties and co-founder of the project Games for the Many. I'm also that speaker that starts making everyone feel a little bit uncomfortable by bringing politics to a games event. So as a Spanish games developer working and living in the United Kingdom, I'm going to start by mentioning a political event that over there was massive. You might have heard about it. The UK decided to leave the European Union in 2016. The general population voted to leave by about 52% in favor, but 80% of the games industry didn't want this. On the day of the result, a bunch of us went to the pub and we ordered drinks and we moped. And we said, how did we contribute to this debate when all we make is games? Then, last year, a sudden general election was called, and the British Labour Party came knocking to our door. They wanted us to make a game that would teach people about their campaign pledges in a way that anyone could understand and engage with. So we kind of took this as an opportunity to stop moping and try to contribute in the only way we knew how, by making games. And that's how Corbyn Run was made. It's a short arcadey game about what Labour stood for during the election. You play Jeremy Corbyn, who is the leader of the Labour Party, and you chase down tax dodgers, taking the money they stole and using it to fund campaign pledges. As you go, people join you until you build up a mass movement, and together you overcome the opposing party, the conservatives. It's really short. It's funny, we hope. We weren't trying to paint a picture of suffering or make Europa Universalis, but rather unpick the complex web of politics and present it in a way that anyone could understand. It went viral. It was downloaded 150,000 times in 1 week and was covered across all major media in the UK and some in Germany and Japan. We started calling games like ours campaign games, a child of news games but tied to particular social or political campaigns. So this is what we learned. Firstly, simulation games have a high barrier to engagement. So much discussion of serious games is centered around what games can do by way of simulating real-world systems. And this can be a valuable approach, but the key to getting a wide audience to share a game and making it go viral is that players can understand and get involved with the game as quickly as possible. And simulation can be a bit too complicated to allow for this sort of engagement. So instead, pick mechanics which tell the political narrative you want to communicate. So by combining simple, expressive mechanics inspired by existing games, we could create an easily legible, engaging way to say what we wanted to say. We got across a rhetorical point that was more abstract, but also easier to grasp. Thirdly is that humor helps disarm people who might not otherwise agree with your point, and it allows a broader audience to enjoy your game. We used memes, humor, and caricature to draw people in, and it was this witty tone that why Corbyn Run broke through filter bubbles and had media pick it up and even allowed conservatives to play and enjoy it, we hope. So art has historically been used as a platform for engaging in political conversation, from Muralismo Mexicano, the Futurists, Dada, the Situationists, and while games are not the answer to everything, and neither should they be, I'm not saying that, I think games can and should form a rich new mode of discourse that allows us to comment on and question our political landscape in illuminating new ways. So we're at the beginning of a burgeoning movement of campaign games. We have Fiscal Combat in France, to run Taipei, and campaign games are on the threshold of having a major impact on political campaigns worldwide. So we feel proud that Corbyn Run had a real-world impact on British politics. And we think what we managed to do shows a path forward for developers all over the world to use games, to participate in political movements. We believe that by making an impact on the political landscape across the world, proving that games can be influential as more than just mass popcorn entertainment, we can earn games a place on the wider cultural table and chart a richer, more secure future for our medium. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. Was that Margaret Thatcher's ghost in the game? Oh, recognize the ghost anywhere. All right, please welcome our final speaker, Ethan.
So I'm here to talk to you today about the brightest future, right? It's what I call the moral imperative for trying hard, doing difficult things, and for coolness, basically, in both aesthetic and modality. But before I get too deep into it, I just want to slap a big ol' IMO on this whole thing. They asked me to give a rant, which was a mistake. I intend to give one. There will be some strong opinions and some unsubstantiated claims, so don't at me. So yeah, who am I? I'm Ethan Red. I'm founder and creative lead of Virtuoso Neo Media. We are a new production house focusing on bringing color and fun and life-affirming charm to what we create. Our current project is Blazing Legion Ignition, a first-person shmup drama about four-story tall mecha and consequences. And just here's some other stuff I've made to get a flavor of me. But enough about me. I'm here to talk to you today about like nothing really technical or even immediately applicable, but I'm here to talk to you about attitude, and specifically one that I've noticed this last maybe 2 years or so that I've playfully dubbed Weak Wave, where it's like this weird demon baby of postmodernism and can't-doism, right? There's so much defeatism. We have like almost this fetish-type relationship with failure, excessive self-deprecation, cynicism, and irony for their own sake. There's nothing wrong with these traits by themselves, right? But taken together, and as a matter of course, I hate this, and it is antithetical to what I think art is supposed to do to me. And don't get me wrong, it is very difficult to be an optimist in the year of our Lord 2018, right? Around the world, we're facing so many rich and complicated issues. And Jimmy, just look at this country. We have a flaming hot Cheeto for our president. We've seen the rise of nationalism. We have almost weekly mass shootings and police brutality. We have people drinking lead water, for God's sake, right? We're facing some really hard stuff. It is a very scary time to be alive. But that is not why we should crawl into our own shells. That is why we should be bold, because we are the artists, the thinkers, the dreamers of dreams, right? We paint the cultural landscape that everyone else lives in. And the world right now needs inspiration. They need to see champions. They need heroes. They need hope. And I think we have a lot to contribute, as artists, game makers, whatever. We need to redefine what we consider possible, both in our craft and in our own lives, because people are watching, right? I like the example of Tony Hawk landing the first 900 in 1999. It was an impossible trick at the time, but has since become standard in vert skating at this level, because kids grew up watching him doing more than what they thought was possible and aspired to that level. We need to do amazing things because they are difficult and because those kids and our peers are watching. We need to bring our best to inspire that in others, like a heroin-addicted kung fu master still looking and seeing potential in a young street urchin who would go on to be one of the greatest action filmmakers of his time and inspire one of the greatest action filmmakers of all time, in my humble opinion. We need to aim higher in our own work and in our fictions that we create. We all love to rag on Star Trek for how campy, colorful, and weird it was back in the 60s, right? But it dared to ask the question, what if things were better? What if we could get along? What if we could invent solutions to our problems instead of just complaining about them? And it inspired civil rights activists like Martin Luther King to technologists like the creators of the first cell phones and home computers that we all use these days, and inspired real-world change. We have more to contribute to this world than depression memes, samey games, and just being sad about stuff. It's hard right now, but we can improve things. We can inspire people who can make a tangible impact on this world, even though our work maybe doesn't. We are tomorrow, and I refuse to live in a world where that is a step backwards from today. I refuse, Virtuoso refuses, and I invite you to as well, because the future is as bright as we make it. Thank you. Forward forever.
Wow. Thank you, Ethan. You crushed it. That wraps it up for the Soapbox and the Independent Game Summit. Please be sure to fill out your feedback forms to let us know how we did, and we hope to see you again next year. But before we go, let's have one final round of applause for all of our amazing speakers. Thank you.